You didn't lose power because you were weak. You lost it because you reacted too much. No one told you this. Not when you defended yourself in arguments that didn't matter. Not when you explained your intentions to people who had already decided who you were. Not when you let someone's words stay in your head long after the moment was over. It didn't feel like weakness. It felt justified. It felt like you were doing the right thing. But every time you reacted without control, you gave something away, not loudly, not all at once, but piece by piece, moment by moment, you trained yourself to be controlled by what happens around you. And the worst part is, you didn't even notice it, because reaction is subtle. It doesn't look like surrender. It looks like engagement. It looks like defending your position. It looks like standing your ground. But if someone can provoke you, they can control you. It's that simple. The moment your emotions are shaped by someone else's behavior, you are no longer in control. You are responding on their terms, not yours. Most people live like this every day. They wake up and immediately start reacting. Messages, opinions, tone, energy. They respond to everything. And because of that, they belong to everything. Their attention is scattered. Their focus is weak. Their state is unstable. And they think this is normal. It's not. It's conditioning. You were trained to react, trained to respond, trained to explain yourself. Because somewhere along the way you started believing that if you don't respond, you lose. That if you don't explain, people will misunderstand you. That if you stay silent, you look weak. But the truth is the opposite. The more you react, the easier you are to read, the easier you are to manipulate. Pogosit power. Real power doesn't show up in how fast you respond. It shows up in how little you need to. And that's the shift most people never make. They spend their entire lives trying to win conversations, prove points, correct perceptions, not realizing they're losing control in the process. Because control was never about dominating others. It was about mastering yourself. And the first thing you have to understand is this. Not everything deserves your reaction. In fact, most things don't. But until you see how often you react without thinking, you'll keep giving your power away and calling it normal. Reaction feels automatic, instant, almost necessary. But that's exactly why it's dangerous. Because the moment you react without thinking, you're no longer choosing your behavior, you're being driven by it. And whoever triggered that reaction, they're now in control of you whether they realize it or not. This is how most people lose power without ever seeing it happen. Not in big moments, not in obvious ways, but in small, repeated reactions that slowly train them to operate on someone else's terms. Someone says something slightly disrespectful. You feel it immediately. Your mind starts moving fast. You replay the tone. You question the intent. You start building a response. Maybe you don't say it out loud, but internally, you're already reacting. And in that moment, your focus is gone. Your presence is gone. You're not where you are anymore. You're stuck inside something that already ended. That's the real cost of reaction. It doesn't just affect what you say. It takes your attention. And once your attention is taken, your control goes with it. Because attention is power. Wherever it goes, your energy follows. And if your energy is constantly being pulled into things that don't matter, you're not in control of your life, you're just responding to it. Most people think control means dominating situations, winning arguments, proving a point. It doesn't. Control is much simpler than that. It's the ability to maintain your internal state regardless of what's happening outside. But the moment your emotions shift based on someone else's words, you've already adjusted yourself to them. You're no longer grounded in your own frame. You're reacting inside theirs. And here's the part most people miss. It feels justified. It feels like you're standing up for yourself, like you're doing what's right. But in reality, you're stepping into a dynamic you didn't choose. You're playing a game that was set up for you, and every time you engage without awareness, you reinforce that pattern. Over time, it becomes invisible. You stop questioning it. You start believing this is just how life works. People say something, you respond. People challenge you, you defend. People misunderstand you, you explain. And just like that, your energy is no longer yours. It's constantly being pulled outward, reacting to everything around you. That's not control. That's dependency. And the longer you stay in that pattern, the easier it is for anyone to influence your state. All they have to do is say the right thing, and you'll do the rest for them. That's why reaction is so dangerous, not because of what it looks like on the outside, but because of what it does internally. It shifts your center. It pulls you away from yourself. And once that happens, you're no longer acting with intention. You're just responding on impulse. You think the moment is over, but it's not. Not for you. Because long after the words are said, long after the situation ends, it keeps running in your head. That's the trap. Not the event itself, but what happens after. You replay it over and over. You go back to the tone, the expression, the exact words. You start analyzing what they meant. Then you start rewriting your own response. What you should have said, what you could have said, what you'll say next time. And while all of this is happening, you're gone. You're not present anymore. You're not focused on what matters. You're locked inside a moment that no longer exists. That's how reaction traps you, not just externally, but internally. Most people think reacting is about what you say out loud. It's not. The real reaction happens in your mind. And that's where the damage is done. Because every time you replay something, you give it more weight than it deserves. You make it bigger, more important, more personal. And slowly, without realizing it, your mental space becomes occupied by things that have no real value. That's why you feel drained. Not because life is overwhelming, but because your mind is constantly processing things it should have let go of. And here's the truth most people avoid. You're not stuck because of what happened. You're stuck because you keep engaging with it. Every replay is a choice, not a conscious one, but still a choice. And the more you engage with it, the deeper it pulls you in. This is where people lose their edge. Not in the moment, but in the aftermath. They carry conversations for hours, sometimes days. They build entire narratives in their head based on a single interaction. They let one comment affect their mood, their focus, their direction. And they don't see it as weakness. They see it as thinking, as processing, as trying to understand. But it's not. It's attachment. It's lack of control. Because if something small can stay in your mind for that long, it owns a part of your attention. And anything that owns your attention has influence over you. That's the invisible prison. No one sees it. No one knows it's there, but you feel it. The tension, the mental noise, the constant background thinking that never fully stops. And the worst part is, you get used to it. You start believing this is just how your mind works. That it's normal to overthink, normal to replay, normal to carry things with you. It's not. It's conditioning. And until you break that pattern, you'll keep giving your mental space to things that don't deserve it. Because real control isn't just about what you say or do. It's about what you allow to stay in your mind after everything is over. There's a moment most people never notice. It's small, almost invisible, but it's where everything is decided. The moment between what happens and how you respond. That space is your power, and most people lose it before they even realize it's there. Something happens, a comment, a tone, a look, and instantly the reaction kicks in. No pause, no awareness, just impulse. And once that impulse takes over, the moment is gone. The choice is gone. You didn't respond, you reacted. This is what separates controlled people from everyone else. Not intelligence, not confidence, control. The ability to slow that moment down just enough to see what's happening before you act on it. Marcus Aurelius understood this better than most. He didn't try to control what people said. He didn't try to correct every misunderstanding. He focused on something far more important, controlling the impulse to react. Because once you control that, everything else becomes easier. But here's the problem. Most people move too fast. They don't see the trigger, they become the trigger. The reaction feels instant, but it's not. There's always a gap, a fraction of a second where you can choose. But if you've trained yourself to react automatically, that gap disappears. And when it disappears, so does your control. That's why slowing down changes everything. Not physically, mentally. You start to notice the reaction forming before it takes over. You feel the tension rising, the urge to speak, to defend, to correct. And instead of following it, you pause, even for a second. That's where the shift begins. Because in that pause, you break the pattern. You stop acting on impulse. You start acting with intention. And once you experience that even once, you realize something most people never understand. You don't have to respond. You don't have to engage. You don't have to give your energy to everything that comes your way. You can choose. And that choice is what gives you control, not over others, but over yourself. And that's the only control that actually matters. Because when you start choosing your responses instead of reacting automatically, your entire presence changes. You're no longer easy to read, no longer easy to provoke, no longer easy to control. You become steady, grounded, deliberate. And that kind of presence doesn't need to prove itself. People feel it without you saying a word. Because when you stop reacting to everything, you stop belonging to everything. You take your attention back, your energy back, your control back, and once you do that, something shifts. You're not just living through situations anymore. You're deciding how you move through them. Most people don't just react, they explain. They feel misunderstood, so they try to fix it. They choose better words, softer tone, more detail. They repeat themselves in different ways, hoping this time it will land, but it rarely does. And the more they try, the more they lose. Because every unnecessary explanation sends a signal, not the one you think you believe you're clarifying. But what you're actually doing is lowering your position. You're telling the other person that their understanding of you matters more than your own clarity, that you need them to see you a certain way in order to feel settled. And once you do that, you've already given away control, because now your peace depends on how they interpret you. And that's a losing game. People don't see you objectively. They see you through their own filters, their past, their beliefs, their insecurities, their expectations. What they hear is not just your words. It's your words mixed with everything they already are. That means no matter how clear you are, there will always be distortion, and no amount of explaining can fully remove that. This is where most people get stuck. They assume the problem is communication, that if they just say it better, slower, more carefully, it will finally click. But often it won't. Not because you failed, but because the other person isn't built to understand it the way you intend. And the more you try to close that gap, the more energy you lose, quietly, gradually, without noticing. You start thinking ahead of conversations, rehearsing what you'll say, adjusting your words before you even speak, not to express yourself, but to prevent being misunderstood. And now you're no longer communicating freely, you're defending yourself before anything even happens. That's how deep this pattern goes. And there's a hidden consequence most people never see. The more you explain unnecessarily, the more you train others to expect it. You teach them that your decisions need justification, that your actions need approval, that your thoughts need to be validated. And once that expectation is set, silence starts to feel uncomfortable. Even to you, it feels like something is missing, like you owe them an explanation, but you don't. Silence is not avoidance. It's a boundary. It says, not everything needs to be explained, and not everyone is entitled to your reasoning. This is where your frame changes. You stop trying to control how others see you. You start controlling how you see yourself, because real clarity doesn't come from agreement, it comes from alignment. When you know what you meant, when you understand your intentions, when you're grounded in your own reasoning, the need to explain disappears. Not because you don't care, but because you're no longer dependent on their perception to stay stable. And that's power. Not loud, not aggressive, but controlled. You speak when it matters. You explain when it adds value, and everything else you let go. Most people are afraid of silence. Not because they don't have anything to say, but because silence removes their safety. When you don't respond, there's no feedback, no signal, no emotional reaction to read. And that makes people uncomfortable because they're used to controlling interactions through your responses. They say something, you react, they push, you respond, they test you, show something. That's how they measure where they stand. But when you stay silent, that system breaks. Suddenly, they don't know what happened. Did it affect you? Did you ignore it? Did you choose not to respond? There's no answer. And that uncertainty shifts the pressure. It moves away from you and onto them. Now they're the ones thinking, replaying, questioning, trying to figure out what your silence means. That's the power of it. Not because you're trying to manipulate anyone, but because you didn't give them what they expected. And when people don't get the reaction they're used to, they lose their reference point. They lose control of the interaction. This is where most people get it wrong. They think silence is passive, weak, avoidant. It's not. Silence is a decision. It's restraint. It's the ability to feel the urge to react and not act on it, because that urge doesn't disappear. It's still there, pushing you to say something, to correct, to defend, to prove your point. But when you hold it, even for a moment, you prove something to yourself. You're not controlled by it. And that changes everything. Because the more you practice that restraint, the less power those impulses have over you. You start to see them clearly. Not as something you have to follow, but as something you can ignore. And once you reach that point, silence becomes natural, not forced, not awkward, just controlled. You're still present, still aware, still engaged. But you're not reacting automatically. You're choosing when to speak and when not to. And that selectiveness creates weight, because what is always available is rarely valued. But what is measured, controlled, intentional, carries presence. People feel it, even if they can't explain it. They notice you're not easy to pull in, not easy to provoke, not easy to read, and that changes how they interact with you. Some will test it, push a little harder, try to break the pattern. Others will adjust, become more careful, more respectful, because they sense you're not operating on impulse anymore, you're operating on control. And that's the difference. You're not silent because you don't have something to say. You're silent because you chose not to say it. And that choice is where your power is. You don't lose power all at once. You lose it through where you place your attention, because attention is not neutral. It's not passive. It's a resource. And every time you give it to something, you're investing part of your energy into it. Most people give it away without thinking. Every comment, every message, every shift in someone's tone, they respond to everything, they engage with everything, and because of that, they belong to everything. Their focus is scattered, their energy is divided, their presence is diluted, and they don't see the cost, because it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like participation, like being involved, like staying connected. But in reality, they're just reacting to whatever shows up. They're not choosing where their attention goes, it's being pulled from them. That's the difference. When you're available to everything, you're controlled by anything. Anyone can step into your space and affect your state. All it takes is the right words at the right moment, and suddenly your focus shifts, your energy shifts, your direction shifts. Not because you chose it, but because you allowed it. This is why selectiveness matters, not as a strategy, but as a standard. You don't engage with everything. You don't respond to everything. You decide what deserves your attention and what doesn't. And that decision changes how you move. You're no longer reacting to life. You're filtering it. You're not avoiding situations. You're refining your participation in them. And that refinement creates value because what is always available is rarely respected. But what is controlled, limited, intentional, carries weight. People notice when your attention is not easy to access. They notice when you don't respond immediately, when you don't engage with everything, when you don't give reactions freely, and that changes how they approach you, because now your presence is not assumed, it's earned. This is where most people hesitate. They think if they step back, they'll lose connection, that if they don't respond quickly, they'll seem uninterested, that if they don't engage constantly, they'll be forgotten. But the opposite is usually true. When you stop overextending your attention, your interactions become more meaningful. You're not engaging out of habit anymore. You're engaging because it matters. And that difference is felt immediately. There's more focus, more intention, more clarity. At the same time, you gain something most people never have: space. Space to think, space to focus, space to move without constant interruption. And in that space, your actions become sharper. You're not jumping from one distraction to another. You're staying with what actually matters. That's where real progress happens. Not in doing more, but in doing what matters without being pulled away. Because every unnecessary interaction comes with a cost. Every reaction takes energy. Every distraction breaks your momentum. And if you don't control where your attention goes, you'll spend your entire life responding to things that don't deserve it. But once you start choosing, once you start filtering, once you stop giving your attention freely, something shifts. You're no longer everywhere. You're exactly where you need to be. And that's where your power starts to concentrate. You don't get controlled by people. You get controlled by your triggers. And most of them you're not even aware of. Someone says something, a tone you don't like, a comment that feels slightly off, and instantly something inside you reacts, not because of what was said, but because of what it touched. That's the part most people miss. The reaction is never just about the moment. It's connected to something deeper, a need to be respected, a need to be understood, an expectation that wasn't met. And when that gets triggered, you don't just respond to the situation, you respond from that need. That's why the reaction feels strong, personal, immediate. But here's the truth. If someone can touch that trigger, they can control your behavior. They don't need to overpower you. They just need to press the right button, and you'll do the rest. You'll react, you'll explain, you'll engage. Not because you chose to, but because you were pushed into it. That's not strength. That's predictability. And predictability is easy to control. This is where awareness changes everything. Because once you start noticing your triggers, they stop being invisible. You begin to see patterns, the same types of comments that affect you, the same situations that pull you in, the same dynamics that make you react without thinking. And once you see them, they lose part of their power. Not instantly, but gradually, because now there's a gap, a moment where you recognize what's happening before you act on it. You feel the reaction building, the tension, the urge to respond, but instead of moving with it immediately, you observe it, you question it. Why does this matter? What is this actually affecting? Is this worth my energy? That pause changes everything because it separates you from the reaction. It turns something automatic into something optional. And in that space, you take control back. This is what people misunderstand about discipline. It's not about suppressing emotion. It's about not being ruled by it. You still feel the trigger, you still notice the reaction, but it doesn't dictate what you do next. You're aware of it without being controlled by it. And that awareness creates stability, not because nothing affects you, but because not everything moves you. You become harder to provoke, harder to pull into unnecessary situations, harder to control, and over time, something shifts. The things that used to affect you don't hit the same anymore. The reactions that used to feel automatic start to feel unnecessary. You begin to see how much of your past behavior was driven by unconscious patterns. And once you see that clearly, you stop identifying with those reactions. You stop thinking, this is just how I am. You realize it was just conditioning. And conditioning can be changed. That's where real control begins. Not in forcing yourself to act a certain way, but in understanding why you react the way you do. Because once you understand it, you're no longer trapped by it. Most people are not chasing truth. They're chasing validation. They want to be understood, seen the right way, interpreted correctly. And because of that, they adjust themselves constantly. They change how they speak, how they act, how they present themselves, all to fit into someone else's perception. That's where they lose their center. Because the moment you rely on others to understand you in order to feel stable, you've already given them control over how you see yourself. And that's unstable by definition, because people don't see you clearly. They never have, they never will, not completely. Everyone interprets you through their own lens, their past, their beliefs, their insecurities, their expectations. What they see isn't just you. It's you filtered through everything they already are. That means even if you say everything perfectly, even if your intentions are clear, even if your logic is solid, they can still misunderstand you. Not because you failed, but because they're not built to receive it the way you intend. And once you accept that, something shifts. You stop chasing understanding. You stop trying to correct every perception. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never going to see you clearly in the first place. Instead, you focus on something else, your own clarity. Because real stability doesn't come from external agreement, it comes from internal alignment. When you know what you meant, when you understand your intentions, when your actions match your standards, you don't need constant validation from the outside. You're already grounded, and that changes how you move. You don't speak to be approved. You speak when it matters. You don't explain to be accepted. You explain when it adds value. You don't react to protect your image. You stay grounded in your position, and everything else you let pass. This is where inner authority is built, not by controlling how others see you, but by removing your dependence on it. You're no longer shaped by perception. You're anchored in your own understanding. And that makes you stable in a way most people aren't. Because now, misunderstanding doesn't shake you. It doesn't pull you into explanations. It doesn't trigger the need to defend yourself. You see it for what it is, someone else's interpretation, not your responsibility, not your burden to fix. That's the difference. Most people spend their lives trying to manage how they're perceived, adjusting, explaining, reacting. And in doing that, they lose themselves. You move differently. You define yourself internally. You don't outsource that to other people. And because of that, your presence changes. There's less hesitation, less overthinking, less need to prove anything. You're not trying to be seen a certain way, you just are. And that certainty, that quiet, controlled confidence is what people actually respond to. Not because you forced it, but because it's real. At some point, something shifts, not loudly, not dramatically, but you feel it. The same situations that used to pull you in don't hit the same anymore. The same comments that used to stay in your head pass through without weight. The same triggers that used to control your reactions lose their grip. And for the first time, you realize something most people never do. Not everything requires your response. That realization changes everything. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how much of your life was spent reacting, responding, explaining, engaging with things that never deserved your energy in the first place. You see how much time you lost replaying conversations, how much focus you lost trying to prove points, how much control you gave away without even realizing it, and now you stop. Not completely, not perfectly, but deliberately. You stop reacting to everything. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You stop giving your attention to things that don't move you forward. And in that restraint, something powerful happens. Your energy comes back to you. Your attention sharpens. Your focus stabilizes. You're no longer being pulled in every direction. You're moving in one. That's where momentum starts. Not from doing more, but from eliminating what doesn't matter. While others are stuck in cycles of reaction, you're building. While they're distracted, you're focused. While they're explaining themselves, you're moving forward without interruption. That's the advantage. Quiet, invisible, but undeniable over time. Because progress doesn't come from reacting to life, it comes from directing it. And you can't direct anything if your attention is constantly being pulled away. This is where control becomes real, not as an idea, but as a way of operating. You don't engage with everything anymore. You don't respond to every shift in your environment. You don't feel the need to prove, defend, or correct every perception you choose. And that choice creates structure. Your actions are no longer scattered, they're intentional. Your energy is no longer divided, it's focused. Your presence is no longer reactive, it's grounded. And that grounded presence changes how everything around you responds. People notice it, they feel it, even if they don't understand it. Because you're no longer easy to influence, not easy to provoke, not easy to control. And that forces a shift in how they interact with you. Some will adapt, some will fall away. But either way, your environment adjusts to your standard. Without you needing to say a word, that's the final shift. You're not trying to control the world around you anymore. You're controlling how you move within it. You're not reacting to everything that happens. You're deciding what deserves your involvement. And in that decision, you take your life back. Because your peace was never something to negotiate. It was something to protect. And the moment you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop giving your energy away without awareness, you become someone most people can't influence anymore. Not because you're stronger than them, but because you finally control yourself.